You wish to know how a vampire is born? Then I will tell you. Or the Professor will, through his tales, if you dare to listen.
Before the world fractured, before God's ward and cursed blood ran in rivers, before she was Silithra, the red veil of the elders, she was Isadora Liss. And Isadora Liss was a goddess of her own stage. The velvet curtains of the royal Orpheum swayed as the gaslights dimmed. A hush fell across the crowd. Nobles and dignitaries pressed into balconies, merchants and soldiers below, all held in suspense. And then her voice, like honey dripped over crystal, like sorrow in bloom. It wasn't a voice, it was a spell, drawn from some ancient place of heartbreak and hunger. Even those who despised opera were held captive by it. The kind of voice sirens might kill to mimic. The orchestra dared not drown her. Even the violins bowed with reverence. Her red hair, unpinned and loose for the final aria, shimmered beneath the footlights, catching fire with every movement. She sang of loss, of stars that burned too briefly, of love she would never know. And when the last note faded into silence, there were no claps. Not yet. There was breathless stillness, then thunderous applause. Backstage, the mood shifted. Isora stood before her mirror, dabbing the sweat from her brow with a silk cloth. The dressing room smelled faintly of roses and powder. Knock after knock came, each a suitor, cloaked in false humility or expensive cologne. "May I offer you a drink, my muse? You sang like a creature born of stardust tonight. You belong on more than stages, Isadora. Let me build you a palace." She turned them away like spoiled wine. "You mistake admiration for entitlement," she said to one. "You mistake talent for possession," she said to another. To the most persistent, "Your lips move, but your mind lags behind. Do come back when it catches up." She smiled, but never softly. Isadora Liss was known not just for her voice, but for her mind. Sharp as broken glass, and just as unforgiving. She had seen what love did to women, watched sopranos married off to counts and crushed beneath boredom, watched them become the decoration of men with fat wallets and thin souls. Isadora wanted none of it. She wanted music, mastery, immortality, on her terms. And yet, that night, as the gas lamps flickered in the cobbled streets and the fog rolled in thick from the canals, she felt a tremor in the air. Something ancient stirred, watching, listening. Beyond the curtain, beyond the roses thrown at her feet, something had heard her song. Not a man, not a mortal, but something that would soon offer her eternity, not as a gift, but as a sentence. The air was still thick with the afterglow of music. The perfume of crushed roses lingered on her dressing table, intermingled with candle smoke and vanity lights that buzzed faintly, as though still humming with her final note. Isadora Liss sat in silence, her fingers brushing over the velvet armrest, still half lost in the world she had conjured moments ago. A soft knock stirred her back to reality, not the eager, frantic tap-in of a suitor, but something slower, composed, intentional. "Enter," she said without looking up. The door opened without a creak, revealing a man. He was tall, his coat of deep obsidian trimmed in silver thread that shimmered like starlight. His eyes were grey, not cold, but vast, like a library filled with forgotten languages. His presence was weight without pressure, gravity without threat. "I do not come to offer admiration," he said. His voice was low and smooth, like warm wine poured into a dark glass. "You do not need it, and I do not offer it." Isadora looked up, eyebrow arched. "Then why come at all?" He paused, regarding her not like a man looks at a woman, but as a scholar observes a rare celestial event. "To say well done. Just that. Nothing more. No lavish compliments, no desperate pleas for attention." His tone was final, yet left a door ajar. She sat straighter. "Who are you?" He smiled, but only with his eyes. "Oh, just a lover of things that are beyond man." And with that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps making no sound against the floorboards. The door closed behind him with perfect quiet. For the first time in years, Isadora was intrigued. It was nearly midnight when she gathered her things. The theatre had quieted. Only the odd echo of boots or laughter from the far end of the corridor reminded her that life still moved beyond the performance. She slipped her long cloak over her shoulders and prepared to leave. Then another knock, sharper, needier. She knew it before it opened. "Please no," she whispered under her breath. The door creaked open. A man stood there, one she had dismissed a dozen times. Victor Holden, wealthy, entitled, the type who mistook persistence for romance. His eyes were glassy with drink or obsession or both. "I love you, Isadora," he said, stepping in uninvited. She did not rise, did not blink. "I've told you, I want nothing to do with you. My art is my calling, not shackles like your affection. And we are not right for each other." Victor's lips trembled. "I could give you everything." "I already have everything," she said, standing now taller than her slight frame should allow. "No one person owns another. We are individuals, and we must act as such." The words were calm, final, surgical. To her, they were truth. To him, they were mockery. Victor's face twisted. What began as hurt collapsed inward to shame, and shame gave way to rage. He reached for the bottle of champagne he had brought, his pathetic offering now forgotten on the table. His hand clenched it like a weapon. "What do I have to do for you to be mine?" He shouted it, trembling with desperation. Her gaze didn't flinch. "Be gone!" And she turned to leave. The crack of glass, a flash of motion, the scream of something primal breaking. The jagged end of the bottle caught her just below the jawline. A gasp, then blood. So much blood. Victor stepped back, staring at the red on his hand, his face, her neck. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wheeze came out. Then he ran. Isadora collapsed, one hand at her throat, the other clawing at the wall. Crimson stained the floor beneath her as her vision swam. She fell to her knees, choking on breath that would not come. The sound of rushing footsteps. Stage hands burst in, shouting, shouting. Someone cried out in horror, and then the world turned black. The headlines were printed in bold across every broadsheet in the city. A voice, silenced. Isadora Lease, maimed in brutal attack. Opera's brightest star falls silent. Tragedy at the Orpheum, the end of an era. Candles were lit outside the theatre. Flowers lined the streets. For days, mourners wept for the loss of a voice that had lifted them to heaven. But the city moved quickly. Mourning was fashionable for a week at most. And then came the questions. 2 weeks had passed since that bloody night. Inside her hospital room, marble floors, tall windows, expensive silence, Isadora sat in a high-backed chair, a book in her lap, though her eyes barely moved across the page. The wound had been patched with skill. The surgeons spoke of miracles. She lived. The blade had missed the carotid artery by mere millimeters, a breath of fate. But her voice was gone, not by choice, not by damage alone. Something deeper had withered, cut not from flesh, but from within. She hadn't spoken a single word since the attack. Opera owners, patrons and investors came like grieving family, but their mourning was not for her. They came with questions, not flowers, with contracts, not prayers. "Will you sing again, Isadora? We have a 5-season investment. Your comeback could draw more than your absence. Surely your silence is only temporary. Modern medicine has healed worse. You'll see. You just need rest." She gave them nothing, not a word, only her eyes, cold, unmoved. In solitude, she tried once. Alone in her room, she spoke a single word. It rasped out of her like gravel against stone. She blinked. No fear, no tears, only the confirmation of what she already knew. Whatever voice once dwelled within her was gone. The next time someone came, a doctor, a patron, another leech, she wrote her answer on a small slate beside her bed. "I can no longer sin. I will not speak." In a mahogany-panelled boardroom across the city, men in gold-trimmed waistcoats and pearl cravats gathered in low light, brandy swirling in their glasses. "She's finished," one of them muttered, fingers tapping a contract filled with now meaningless clauses. "For years, we've sunk coin into her performances, promised seasons, tours, international rights." Another slammed a glass down. "And for what?" A third leaned forward, eyes narrowed, calculating. "If only she had died that night." The others turned. "At least then we'd have the insurance claim. The policy was generous. I made sure of that." A few looked uncomfortable. One chuckled dryly. "But this," the first said, "this is the worst case scenario. Not dead, not profitable, just silent." The second man, his teeth too white, his smile too wide, sighed. "Well," he said with cruel calm, "she's not out of the woods yet, is she? An infection, a complication. These things do happen, even in the best of hospitals." A pause, then a smirk. "We may still have our resolution, one way or another." Laughter echoed through the room, dull, lifeless laughter, the kind spoken by men who weighed life against profit. Back in the quiet of her room, Isadora sat unmoving, her reflection staring back at her from the window pane. She had heard their words, all of them, and within that silence, something was growing. Not rage, not grief, but something older, a seed, a hunger. Something was waiting for her to break. She would not, but she would change. Hospitals were meant to be places of healing, but tonight the halls carried another intent. The lights flickered, the rain whispered against tall glass windows, and distant thunder rolled like drums for a funeral procession not yet named. Somewhere in the building, a nurse hummed to herself just before the power stuttered once and failed. The quiet that followed was absolute. Isadora Leith sat alone in a hospital room that was not hers. She had moved there in the dead of night. She'd told no one. She left no note. But she knew they would come. Not from letters, not from rumours, but in the tone of those men, in their measured voices and hollow condolences. She had lived a life around the wealthy, the invested, the desperate. She knew what men like them did when something that they could not control threatened to devalue. Her silence was not mystery, it was liability. They would not wait for infection or misfortune. They would make their own. So she waited, still unmoving. She no longer cared for survival, only for truth. If they came, so be it. She would face them as she was, broken, voiceless, yet completely, utterly herself. And then it began. The crash of glass, the sharp slam of a door, boots, voices, check every room. Where is she? She remained seated in the corner of the room, back straight, expression calm. Her fingers traced the edge of the chair's armrest. She heard them shout, threaten, curse. Then, "We will find you." Her door burst open. A masked figure stood in the threshold, his scarf hiding all but his eyes. They met hers and something faltered. Isadora did not flinch. She looked at him as if he were nothing. Then, for the first time since that night, she spoke. "Come to claim your investment." Her voice was raw, scratching and deep, not the voice of a songbird, but of something crawling from a forgotten tomb. The man froze. "She's here," he shouted. Two more rushed in. One chuckled. "Nothing personal, love," he said. Her answer was flat. "Do what you must." They advanced. 3 shadows in the dark, knives ready, masks impersonal, and then... "Stop!" The voice was silk on steel, sharp, commanding, otherworldly. All 3 turned. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, his coat unruffled by wind that did not exist indoors, his presence like a weight, falling into the world. The stranger, the elegant man from the theatre. "Why break such a perfect instrument?" he asked gently. "Get him," one of the thugs barked, "or we'll do you as well." "Dare," the man said softly, "to threaten me." Then he vanished, not in a blink, not in a flash, but as if the shadows themselves had pulled him from sight. Before Isadora could process it, he was behind the first man. A whisper, a sound like air escaping lungs. The first thug fell to the ground with a soft thud, body limp, eyes frozen wide. The second turned to run, too slow. The stranger's hand reached out, then shadow swallowed him. The third didn't even scream. Isadora didn't move. When it was done, he returned, not a hair out of place. His eyes, cool and ancient, regarded her with something like respect. "You'd best come with me, my dear," he said. "I believe they'll keep trying to silence you. Permanently." She stood. No hesitation. No questions of morality or disbelief. Only one thing left to know. "Who are you?" she rasped. He smiled faintly. "Oh, I am Alaric." They did not walk. They did not flee. They moved, like breath across candlelight, like ink bleeding into paper. When Alaric touched her, it was as if the world sighed and time folded inward. Her body dissolved into shadow, her consciousness stretching and twisting, passing between fractured slivers of space. The hospital, the city, the pain, it all fell behind like a stage curtain dropping to the floor. When her form reassembled, The nausea hit her instantly. Her stomach turned. Her vision swam. She fell to her knees. "It will pass," Alaric said, watching her without concern. "The first time always unsettles the flesh." She inhaled slowly, focused, controlled it, and then she stood. "I know who you are now," she rasped, her voice scraping the still air like broken glass. "But what are you?" He tilted his head, expression unreadable. "I am Alaric. I have watched you for many years, heard your voice long before others knew to listen. It disturbs me," he said with a trace of bitterness, "that the very night I chose to speak to you, another saw it too." He paused, his voice low. "And that was the night you lost it all." Isadora's response came without hesitation. "I've lost nothing," she said. "My voice has changed, but it does not define me." Alaric smiled, not kindly, but approvingly. "Exactly. That is why I came to you that night, not to praise you. You don't need approval." I said, "Well done," because you endured a world that never wanted you to survive it. You stood tall, not to be seen, but because it is who you are. Unshaken, undiluted. Your voice was a rebellion. Even those who envied it couldn't look away. "And now it's gone," she whispered, "but I still stand tall." Alaric nodded slowly. "What if you could have it back?" he asked. She looked at him, truly looked. "To sing again?" she asked. "To do what I feared for years, until I dared to do it?" She drew breath. "Yes, I would like that." "But at what cost?" she added. Alaric looked down, as if weighing a truth too heavy for words. "The cost," he said, "is your life, as you know it. You will die and be reborn, not only with your voice, but with power, strength, freedom. But you will lose your love for mankind. You will drift from its warmth. Connection will grow distant." She studied him, her eyes hard but not afraid. "Will I be able to sing?" she asked. "Yes," he answered, voice sure and still. "You will sin again." She looked past him then, into the darkness beyond the chamber, where the air whispered of ancient things and unseen horrors. "Then that is what matters," she said. "Not if they like my voice, not if they approve, only that I can create with it." He smiled again. Something darker stirred behind it. "Oh, Isadora," he said softly, "you will do more than create." Her breath was steady, not nervous, not afraid, accepting. She tilted her head slightly, exposing her pale neck. A final gesture of consent, of resolve. Alaric stepped forward, reverent and quiet. No seduction, no false intimacy. This was death. This was ritual. His lips brushed the skin, then his fangs sank in deep. She didn't cry out. She didn't wince. She accepted. Her body slumped to the floor, blood draining, skin turning alabaster. The warmth of life slipped from her limbs like a silk robe falling to the floor. She didn't resist it. She embraced it. Alaric knelt beside her still form. "Now," he whispered, "you shall become one of us. An elder. A powerful one." He slit his own palm with a blackened blade, dark blood welling up. As he chanted in a language that trembled the walls, he let it fall into her mouth, bit by bit, drop by drop. The shadows bent toward him, the torches dimmed. Listening. His voice echoed in that ancient tongue, no syllables a mortal could repeat, no rhythm a living mind could hold. When the words ceased, he placed his hand gently on her chest and waited. Minutes passed, then hours, then a twitch, a spasm. Her fingers clenched, her body jerked, and then she rose, not like one awakening, but like a puppet pulled upright by unseen strings. Her eyes opened. They were the same, and not deeper, hungrier. Her expression remained serene, but it was no longer human. Alaric watched in silence. She looked around slowly. She could hear everything. The walls breathing, the stones settling, the spiders spinning their webs. She turned and saw a gnat across the chamber. She could see its wings fluttering in detail no mortal eye could comprehend. The shadows whispered to her, and she whispered back. She opened her mouth. Her voice, silk, smooth, effortless. She smiled. There was no pain now, no damage, only sound, perfect and absolute. She opened her mouth again and sang. A single note. It rang like crystal in a cathedral, pure and transcendent. But then she sang again, this time with intention, with hunger. The note that came next echoed like a scream from a dying world. Windows cracked, glass shattered. The torches flickered violently. The walls moaned under pressure that should not exist. Even the shadows flinched. And then she stopped and smiled. "I like this," she said. Alaric finally stood. "Then go." She turned to him, confused. "Go?" "We must never meet again. You are an elder now. One of us." He stepped into the half-light, his presence already fading. "We each have our powers, and I can see yours. Your voice, as I always knew, is your gift, your weapon, your curse." He approached her one final time. "Hide from the sun. Hide from the hunters. Stay in the shadows. Do not reveal what you've become. If they see it, if they know." He paused. "They will never let you exist in their world." She nodded slowly, absorbing the truth without emotion. "You will need to feed," he added, voice cooler now. "There is an abundance here in this city. I would choose the ones who wronged you first." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," he said, not looking back. "There is another. His name is Eldritch. One of us, the best of us." He looked at her then, with something close to fondness. "Seek him out. You speak his language, more than I ever could." And with that, he vanished into shadow, leaving only the silence and Silithra standing in it, reborn. The city slept, unaware. She did not. Silithra moved through the night like a forgotten melody, smooth, eerie, impossible to follow. The shadows obeyed her, parting with reverence, letting her pass as though she were born of them. She needed no effort, no thought. She was a ghost written into the ink of the alleyways, gliding from rooftop to street to silence. She arrived at his home just before midnight. Victor, the man who had destroyed her, and ran. She stood outside the manor, cloaked in shadow, observing through the frost-laced window pane. He sat alone, pacing, drinking. His face was drawn, pale with regret and fear. His hands trembled as he lit yet another candle, as if more light would keep her from reaching him. She could have entered. She felt it, the power to do so. But something in her blood whispered restraint, not fear. Tradition. A law older than stone. Something sacred even now. So she knocked, soft, measured. He froze. "Victor," she whispered. her voice curling through the door like perfume. "It's me." His breath caught. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered. I... His voice cracked. "It can't be." "I forgive you," she said, her tone sweet, tinged with mourning. "I want to be with you. I came back. For you." The door creaked open. He stood in the threshold, eyes wide, a trembling wreck of the man he had once tried to be. "How?" he stammered. "How are you even... Are you all right?" "I am," she said softly. "I didn't mean to. I was just angry. I was scared. I'm so sorry, Isadora." She tilted her head, lips forming a faint, eerie smile. "Are you going to leave me standing here all night?" she asked. "Or will you invite me in?" He blinked. Of course. Come in, please, come in." And with that, the barrier fell. She stepped into the house, gliding past him like smoke. He spoke quickly, nervously, rambling. "I've been in such a state. I couldn't sleep. I thought I killed you. I thought... Oh God, Isadora, I'm so glad it wasn't serious." She turned to him, her face lit only by the dim flicker of a single candle. "It is so like you," she said, voice low and measured, "to destroy what you cannot have, what is better than you. You must pull down. You don't say well done. You ask, who did she trample to get there?" She took a slow step toward him. "Somehow, you have shaped this world, and how men are supposed to think in it, and in doing so, you have kept women, like me, from ever truly being." Victor's face twisted in confusion and fear. I didn't..." She raised her hand. "I see now," she said. "The simplest way to fix this world is to remove what's wrong with it." Then her mouth opened. A single note escaped. Not a scream, not a wail. Music, but it was not made for mortal ears. It vibrated through the walls, shook the furniture. Victor's eyes rolled back in his head as he screamed, blood pouring from his ears. He collapsed to the floor, writhing. And then the hunger struck her. It was not a craving. It was a need, ancient and wild. Her fangs extended as though they had always been part of her. With a grace that turned primal in an instant, she leapt, her voice still humming through the air, vibrating like strings pulled too tight. She struck. Teeth pierced flesh. And there, in the flickering candlelight, Isadora Silithra fed. Her first night, her first death, her first aria of vengeance. The manor stood tall atop the hill, its gilded edges proof of what the world rewarded: manipulation, greed, possession masquerading as patronage. The home of those men, the investors, the patrons, the vultures who fed on her voice while plotting her extinction. Tonight, the lights inside burned bright, glasses clinked, laughter laced with lies. They were celebrating. Perhaps some new star they hoped to replace her with, or more likely, congratulating themselves for minimizing the damage of her loss. They believed her dead. They believed wrong. She arrived in silence. The gates didn't resist her. The shadows obeyed. She walked without fear, without shame, without apology. She was not here to plead. She was not here to explain. She was here to speak. Inside, a servant passed the corridor. She tilted her head, her voice like honey laced with dusk. "Would you be so kind as to let me in?" she whispered. He turned. stunned by her beauty, struck dumb by her presence. Of course, my lady," he stammered, opening the door wide. "Come in." She stepped through. The doors to the banquet hall flew open. The room fell silent. There she stood, crimson gown flowing like blood made silk, red hair crowned with shadow, her presence a living contradiction, beautiful and terrible, radiant and absolute. One of the men dropped his glass. Another muttered, "Impossible." She stepped forward, unblinking. "No," she said, voice like velvet drawn over razors. "Inevitable." The man who had once spoken of insurance money stepped back, colour draining from his face. "You were dead?" "No," she replied with something like amusement. "I was silenced. There's a difference." She walked into their midst as if she owned the very concept of consequence. "You plotted to kill what you could not understand, because I refused to kneel, because I refused to flatter your egos or feign weakness for your approval." Her eyes swept across the room. "I did not sing for you. I sang because that is who I am. That is my truth. My soul made sound." She paused before the head of the table, where the investor sat like a king in his castle, now trembling. "You believed your opinion gave me value. You were mistaken. I was not born to bend. I do not ask. I do not wait. I create." Her voice sharpened. "I am not a reflection of your investments. I am not a product you brand or sell. I do not seek to be liked, only to exist purely without distortion." She stepped onto the center of the banquet table, towering over them now. "You backed me because I filled your pockets. You betrayed me because I threatened your control. Now I return to make one thing clear." She opened her mouth. A single pure note shattered the chandelier above. It was not just sound, it was judgment. Glass rained like diamonds. Windows cracked. Blood poured from ears and eyes. Screams erupted, cut short by the second note. This one bent the world. The walls shook. Shadows burst forth like wolves unchained. She moved through them, fast, elegant, merciless. Each man met their end, not with glory, but with irrelevance. They would be footnotes in a story far greater than their shallow lives. The final one she approached knelt in terror. "Please," he whispered. "Why?" She leaned in close. "Because I can." And then silence. Months later, the opera house was filled again. Word had spread of a new performer, one whose voice was unlike anything ever heard before. A mystery, a miracle. The curtain opened. The announcer stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, barely hiding his awe, "after the tragic loss of Isadora Liss, we are honoured to welcome her successor, a voice reborn. She performs under a new name, in honour of her transformation." He took a breath, voice trembling. "I give you Silithra." The curtains parted. She stepped into the light, alone, whole, eternal. And when she sang, the world forgot to breathe.
And that is my story, but there are many more tales to chill you. From the Professor.
soft roar of the waves whispered against the sandy shore as Claire and Daniel strolled hand in hand under the fading light of the setting sun. It was their anniversary, a quiet retreat to the seaside town of Ashhaven, a place Claire had visited with her grandparents as a child. She had suggested the trip to escape the noise of their lives in the city, a perfect way to celebrate their 3rd year of marriage. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand, his face relaxed yet thoughtful. "I still can't believe you agreed to go out with me," he said with a chuckle. Claire smiled, nudging him playfully with her shoulder. "You asked me out with a sticky note on my coffee cup. It was cute." "I was too nervous to say it out loud," Daniel admitted, his ears reddening. "But you said yes." "I did," Claire said softly, gazing out at the horizon. "It felt right, like I'd known you forever, even though we'd just met." Daniel kissed her temple. "Well, I'm glad you felt that way, because I've never been so sure of anything in my life." The couple walked in comfortable silence for a moment, the wind brushing through Claire's dark hair. She tilted her head, watching the waves roll towards the shore. "I used to come here every summer with my grandparents," she said. "They'd tell me old legends about the sea, cursed treasure, ghost ships, that sort of thing. My grandpa loved telling scary stories." "Like what?" Daniel asked, his curiosity piqued. Claire paused, trying to recall. One story was about a ship that would appear in the fog, searching for something, or someone. If you saw it, you were cursed, doomed to sail with it forever. I think it was just one of those tales meant to keep kids from wandering too far." "Sounds spooky," Daniel said, his tone light, but a shiver crawled up his spine as the wind seemed to shift. Claire was about to respond when she stopped abruptly, her gaze fixed on the water. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing. Daniel followed her line of sight. A ship rested on the horizon, its silhouette dark and foreboding against the fiery sky. It was unlike anything they'd seen before, its masts jagged and tattered, as if it had weathered centuries of storms. The air grew unnaturally still, the sound of the waves seeming to vanish. "I didn't think there were any trawls or fishing boats out here," Daniel said, his brow furrowed. "There aren't," Claire replied, her voice tight. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes locked on the vessel. A faint sound drifted toward them, a low, mournful cry that sent a chill through their bones. Claire shivered, her grip on Daniel's hand tightening. "We should go," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly. Claire didn't move. The cries grew louder, and she felt a strange pull in her chest, like invisible threads tugging her towards the bow of the ship. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" "The voices," Claire murmured, her tone distant. Daniel shook her gently. "Claire, come on. This is weird. Let's get out of here." Reluctantly, Claire nodded, allowing him to lead her away. As they hurried back toward their rental cottage, the air seemed to thicken around them. Glancing over her shoulder, Claire saw the ship again, closer this time. It loomed impossibly large, its hull rising like a shadow from the water. By the time they reached the cottage, the cries had faded, replaced by the sound of the waves once more. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the ship had followed them. And deep down, Daniel couldn't either. The quaint seaside cottage, once so cosy and inviting, now felt cold and foreign. The crackle of the fireplace that had earlier warmed the room seemed to have faded into an eerie silence. Claire sat on the edge of the couch, staring into her untouched cup of tea. Daniel paced the small living room, glancing nervously at the curtained windows every few moments. Maybe it's just a fishing boat, Claire said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice lacked conviction, the faint tremor betraying her unease. Daniel stopped pacing and turned to her. Fishing boats don't look like that, Claire, and they don't follow people. She looked at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to believe there was a logical explanation, but deep down, she knew better. Suddenly, a sharp tapping sound echoed through the room. Claire jumped, spilling her tea. Daniel moved toward the window cautiously, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called, his voice firm but unsteady. No answer came, only the sound of the wind picking up outside. He slowly pulled back the curtain, peering out into the darkness. The beach was empty, the waves lapping against the shore as usual. "Nothing," Daniel said, trying to reassure himself as much as Claire. As he turned away, Claire gasped, pointing at another window. Her face was pressed against the glass, pale and glowing with a faint greenish hue, like the light reflected off deep ocean waters. Its eyes were hollow, black pits, and its mouth hung open in a silent scream. "Daniel!" she screamed, scrambling off the couch. He whipped around, catching a glimpse of the ghastly visage before it disappeared into the night. "What the hell was that?" Daniel said, his voice trembling. Claire shook her head, clutching her arms. I don't know. The tapping resumed, this time more insistent, coming from all the windows at once. The sound was accompanied by faint whispers, unintelligible but chilling. Daniel grabbed a fire poker, as if it could defend them against whatever was outside. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the front door. "Daniel, don't." Claire started, but he was already opening it. Outside, the air was thick with an unnatural fog that clung to the ground, swirling like restless spirits. Daniel stepped out cautiously, the fire poker clenched tightly in his hand. He glanced toward the sea and froze. The ship was closer now, its massive hull looming like a fortress. Its greenish glow illuminated the fog, casting an otherworldly light across the beach. "Claire," Daniel called, his voice low and urgent. "We need to leave, now." Claire joined him at the doorway, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the ship. The cries from before returned, louder and more desperate, as if pleading with them. Daniel grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the car parked beside the cottage. "Come on." They climbed into the vehicle, slamming the doors shut. Daniel started the engine, the headlights cutting through the thick fog. As they backed out of the driveway, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a chorus of despair. "Don't look back," Daniel said, his voice tight as he drove away. Claire couldn't help herself. She turned to glance out the rear window and gasped. The ship was visible through the fog, impossibly close now, its ghostly crew standing at the rails, their glowing eyes fixed on her. "Drive faster," she urged, her voice shaking. Daniel pressed harder on the gas, the tires skidding slightly as they turned onto the main road. The fog seemed to follow them, curling around the car like tendrils. Even the roadside puddles reflected the haunting image of the ship. "We're getting out of here," Daniel said, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. "We'll head home, far away from this place." But deep in her heart, Claire knew the ship would follow. The eternal tide was a ship that inspired awe and dread in equal measure. With its sleek black hull and towering masts, it cut through the waves like a predator in pursuit. Its captain, Elias Blackthorne, was a man of quiet intensity, his piercing blue eyes always scanning the horizon. A respected mariner and ruthless leader, Blackthorne had spent decades building his reputation and his ship into legends whispered across ports. Yet even legends can falter. The ship's lanterns, cast an eerie glow on the deck as the crew worked tirelessly to load the latest haul of goods from a successful raid. Among them was a wiry man named Silas Drake, whose quick hands and quicker tongue had earned him both favour and suspicion among his crewmates. Silas was known for his cunning, a trait that Captain Blackthorne both admired and distrusted. Blackthorne leaned against the rail of the ship, watching as Silas approached. The captain had summoned him with a promise of opportunity, but there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something unspoken lingered between them. "Oh, you wanted to see me, Captain?" Silas asked, his voice smooth, but with a hint of nervousness. Blackthorne nodded, his eyes narrowing. "You've always had a knack for creative problem-solving, Silas. I have a task for you, one that requires a man of your particular skills." Silas tilted his head, intrigued. "I'm listening." Blackthorne glanced around, ensuring no one else was within earshot. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's a ship I've been chasing, a fat merchant vessel ripe for plunder, but their captain is clever, too clever to take head on. I need you to infiltrate their crew, gain their trust, and feed me their location. Once we have them in our sights, the spoils will be worth more than gold. Do this, and I'll see you richly rewarded." Silas smiled, but his eyes flickered with something darker. "Consider it done, Captain." What Blackthorne didn't know was that Silas had already made a deal, one that would ensure his own survival at the cost of his loyalty. Weeks earlier, in a smoky tavern on the island of Redwater Cove, Silas had been approached by a pirate captain named Garrick Stone. Garrick, a hulking brute with a scarred face and a reputation for ruthlessness, had offered Silas a fortune in exchange for sabotaging the Eternal Tide and leading its crew into an ambush. Silas had agreed without hesitation. The betrayal unfolds. 2 nights later, under a moonless sky, Silas crept through the bows of the Eternal Tide. His hands trembled as he poured sand into the barrels of gunpowder and loosened critical bolts on the rudder chain. He worked quickly, knowing that Garrick and his pirates would be waiting just beyond the horizon. As dawn broke, Silas made his move. Feigning illness, he requested permission to go ashore at a nearby port to, rest and recover. Blackthorne, preoccupied with preparations for their next raid, waved him off with little more than a grunt. Silas stepped off the Eternal Tide with a smile hidden beneath his hood. He didn't look back. Hours later, the ship's sabotage became apparent. The rudder jammed, leaving the Eternal Tide adrift, and when Blackthorne ordered the cannons readied, the gunpowder fizzled uselessly. Before the crew could react, the horizon filled with the black sails of Garrick Stone's fleet. "Pirates!" the lookout shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Blackthorne's heart sank as the enemy ships closed in, their cannons already firing. The Eternal Tide was a sitting duck, its crew scrambling in vain to prepare for a battle they could not win. As the pirates boarded the ship, chaos erupted. Blackthorne fought valiantly, cutting down wave after wave of invaders with his cutlass, but it was no use. The Eternal Tide was overwhelmed, its crew slaughtered or captured. Bloodied and beaten, Blackthorne was dragged to the deck, where Garrick Stone waited with a smirk. "So, this is the great Elias Blackthorne," Garrick said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Betrayed by your own man. You should choose your crew more carefully." Blackthorne glared at him, spitting blood onto the deck. "Where is Silas?" "Long gone," Garrick replied with a laugh. "He played his part beautifully, and now he's enjoying the spoils of his treachery while you rot." Blackthorne's eyes burned with fury. He struggled against the pirates holding him, but they held fast. "I'll find him," Blackthorn growled, his voice like thunder. "I'll hunt him to the ends of the earth. Mark my words, he won't escape me." Garrick laughed again. "You won't have the chance, Captain, but don't worry. You'll have plenty of time to curse his name while you're rotting in the deep." With a cruel grin, Garrick signalled to his men. Blackthorn was thrown into the sea, the cold water swallowing him whole. As he sank into the darkness, his rage burned brighter than ever, a fire that refused to be extinguished. The curse is born. What happened next remains a mystery, but the eternal tide was never seen again by mortal eyes. Some say Blackthorn's fury was so great that it defied death itself, binding him to the ship and cursing it to sail forever in search of Silas Drake. And those who encounter the eternal tide know this: the ship collects its debts, no matter how long it takes. The car's headlights barely pierced the dense fog that blanketed the road, making the familiar rut home feel like an endless maze. Claire clutched her phone, glancing at the GPS, even though she knew the way. Her breathing was shallow, and every shadow beyond the windshield seemed alive. "Just keep driving," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm not stopping," Daniel replied, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His knuckles were white, and his foot pressed hard on the gas pedal. They had been driving for nearly an hour, but the oppressive fog made it feel much longer. The air inside the car was thick with tension. The silence, broken only by the sound of the engine and Claire's occasional nervous gasps. As they approached the small car bridge that crossed Willow Lake, Claire sat up straighter. "We're almost past the lake," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Just get us over the bridge." The bridge loomed ahead, its narrow span barely visible through the swirling mist. The lake on either side was obscured, a black void stretching into the unknown. As the car's tyres hit the wooden planks of the bridge, Claire let out a shaky breath, but then she saw it. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What?" he asked, his eyes focused on the road. "Look." Daniel glanced to his right, and his blood ran cold. Rising from the lake was the eternal tide, its massive hull glowing faintly with an otherworldly green light. The ship was impossibly large, its mast piercing through the fog, its sails tattered and fluttering in a wind that didn't exist. "What the hell is that doing here?" Daniel shouted, his voice shaking. The mournful cries they had heard before began again, louder this time, echoing across the lake and through the car. Shadows moved on the deck, and Daniel swore he saw faces, twisted, glowing and watching them. "Go faster!" Claire screamed. Daniel slammed his foot on the gas, the car jerking forward as they sped off the bridge and back onto the main road. The cries faded slightly, but the oppressive weight of the ship's presence lingered, making every breath feel like a struggle. They entered the town, the familiar streets offering little comfort. The fog was thicker here, clinging to the lampposts and storefronts, like a living thing. Claire glanced out the window, her eyes widening. "Daniel, the people..." He turned his head briefly, his stomach twisting at the sight. Figures stood motionless on the sidewalks, their faces pale and faintly glowing with the same greenish hue as the ship. They looked like townsfolk. An old man in a flat cap, a young woman with a stroller. But their eyes were hollow, their mouths open in silent wails. Daniel swerved back onto the centre of the road, trying to avoid looking at them. "Just don't look, Claire. Don't stop. We're almost home." The figures grew more numerous as they drove, lining the streets and standing in intersections. Their ghostly forms flickered like broken images, their hollow eyes following the car. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her seat. "This can't be real. This can't be happening." "It's real enough," Daniel muttered, his voice tight. Finally, they turned onto their street, the small, familiar houses looming in the fog. Daniel slammed the car into park in their driveway, his hand shaking as he turned off the engine. They bolted out of the car and into the house, slamming the door behind them. Claire locked it, her fingers fumbling with the latch. Inside, the silence was deafening. The faint cries from the ship seemed to echo in their minds, even though they could no longer hear them. "We just have to wait it out," Daniel said, pacing the living room. His voice was firm, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. "Until morning. It'll go away in the morning." Claire nodded, though she wasn't convinced. She moved to the window and peeked through the curtains. The fog swirled outside, thicker than ever, but the street was empty. No glowing figures, no ship in sight. For now, Daniel sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. "Whatever this is, it's not over, but we'll get through it." Claire sat beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder, and neither of them spoke, both too afraid to put their thoughts into words. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching into eternity. And outside, the fog waited. Daniel paced the living room, peering through the curtains every so often. The fog clung to the windows, thick and unyielding. He glanced at the clock. 2:45 a.m. Morning felt a lifetime away. "We're safe in here," Daniel said, his voice steady but tired. "We just need to stay locked up until sunrise." Claire sat on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest. She nodded absently, her eyes fixed on the floor. Daniel tried to calm himself, focusing on the mundane details of the room. The old rug, the faint hum of the fridge, the worn-out coffee table they had talked about replacing. Anything to drown out the memory of the ship and the glowing figures they had passed in town. Time crawled by, the silence oppressive. Daniel sat down beside Claire, rubbing his eyes, and then he noticed it. The faint chill against his skin, the sound of the wind, soft and mournful, echoing inside the house. He turned his head towards the front hallway and froze. The door was wide open. Fog poured inside like a living thing, curling around the floor and spreading into the room. Daniel jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. "Claire, the door." His words died in his throat as he saw the figure standing in the doorway. Tall and imposing, with a long coat tattered from years of decay, Captain Elias Blackthorne stepped inside, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. His eyes burned with a greenish glow, and his pale face was etched with a fury that transcended time. Daniel stumbled back, his voice rising in panic. "Get out, Claire! He's here! He's got in—" He turned to Claire, desperate to protect her, but stopped cold. A faint green light surrounded her. The same eerie glow that radiated from Blackthorne. She stood slowly, her expression calm yet unreadable. "Claire?" Daniel's voice cracked. She tilted her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "It was I who let him in." Daniel's mind reeled. What are you talking about?" Blackthorne stepped closer, his boots crunching on the fog-covered floor. His voice was deep, cold, and full of disdain. "Well done, my descendant. The Blackthorne lineage has waited years for this revenge." Daniel looked between them, confusion giving way to dread. "Descendant?" Claire turned to him, her smile widening. "I was the one who found you, Daniel. The one who brought you here. All this time you thought it was chance, but it wasn't." Blackthorne spoke, his gaze never leaving Daniel. "Years ago, your ancestor, Silas Drake, betrayed me, sold me out to pirates, and doomed me to an eternity of vengeance. I swore then that I would hunt down his bloodline, and today I shall have it." Daniel's knees felt weak. He looked at Claire, tears welling in his eyes. "Claire, please, don't do this." Claire laughed, her voice cold and hollow, no trace of the woman he had loved. "This isn't about you, Daniel. This is about justice, Blackthorn's justice. The fog grew thicker, swirling violently around the room as Blackthorn raised his hand. Daniel tried to move, to run, but his body felt paralysed, the air heavy and suffocating. The last thing Daniel saw was Claire's glowing form, her eyes cold and unrecognisable, and the faint smirk on Blackthorn's face. Outside the house, the glow intensified, the green light spilling out through the windows. A single, piercing scream shattered the silence of the night, and then there was only darkness. The eternal tide. Sometime later, under a pale dawn sky, another couple walked along the beach. The waves lapped gently at their feet, the morning air crisp and cool. "Did you hear the story about this place?" one of them asked. "They say there's a ghost ship that appears in the fog. Creepy, huh?" The other laughed nervously. "You don't actually believe that, do you?" As they spoke, a thick fog began to roll in from the horizon. The eternal tide emerged from the mist, its tattered sails and glowing hull casting an ominous shadow over the water. The couple stopped, staring in awe and fear. On the deck of the ghostly ship, a lifeless figure moved among the crew, a deckhand with hollow eyes and a face twisted in despair. It was Daniel, cursed to sail the seas forever, another soul claimed by Blackthorn's eternal vengeance. The fog swallowed the ship once more, leaving the beach empty save for the whispers of the waves. Elliot Crane leaned back in his leather office chair, a smirk stretching across his face as he gazed at his cityscape view. He was feeling especially proud today. Elliot, the founder of an ever-expanding fitness empire called Titan Wellness, had just secured a win that tasted sweeter than any before. His gaze flicked to his phone, where a new email pinged, confirming what he already knew. A local fitness facility, FitCore, was on the verge of collapse, and he was the reason. 2 months ago, Elliot had strolled into FitCore under the guise of a friendly mentor, offering business tips to the owner, Jeff Adams. Jeff had been running his small, community-focused gym for over a decade, known for its warm atmosphere and loyal members. But loyalty, Elliot knew, was a fragile thing, easily bent and broken with the right amount of pressure. He'd made it a sport to see just how far he could push. At first, he'd been charming, striking up friendly conversations with Jeff, learning everything he could about the facility's strengths and weaknesses. Elliot had even done a few workouts there, drawing curious eyes as he greeted Jeff with familiarity. Slowly, he started planting seeds of doubt among the members, subtle, seemingly offhand remarks about Jeff's lack of ambition and poor business practices. "It's a shame, really," Elliot would say in the locker room, casual as anything. FitCore could be great if Jeff didn't have his head stuck in the past. Soon, whispers turned to full-blown rumours. Members began questioning Jeff's decisions, and dissatisfaction grew. Elliot watched with satisfaction as, one by one, members defected to his Titan Wellness clubs, lured by flashy facilities, advanced equipment, and a persuasive new member discount. Now Jeff was drowning in debt, his business faltering. The irony wasn't lost on Elliot as he leaned back, recalling his last encounter with Jeff just a few days ago. Jeff had pleaded with him, desperation etched across his face. "Elliot, I thought you were here to help," he'd said, nearly choking on the words. "Jeff, all's fair in business, right?" Elliot had replied, feigning sympathy. "This is the new way to recruit customers. You can't be soft anymore. or you'll get eaten alive." Sitting in his office now, he chuckled to himself, feeling no remorse. In his mind, this was how business was done. He thrived on being ruthless. It was his edge, the very reason he was successful. His empire wasn't built on trust or friendship. Those were tools to be used, not qualities to be honoured. As he stood, he caught his reflection in the glass, a man in his mid-40s, immaculately dressed, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked every part the self-made mogul, and he was proud of it. He'd carved his own path, and if people got crushed along the way, that was simply the cost of success. Later that night, he attended a charity gala downtown, where he planned to network and flaunt his recent victories. Mingling with powerful investors and celebrities, he was in his element. Until, across the room, he spotted her, a woman who seemed to radiate elegance and allure. She was young, strikingly beautiful, and carried an air of sophistication that was impossible to ignore. Intrigued, he made his way over, flashing his signature charming smile. She introduced herself as Lila Valen, a venture capitalist with a knack for spotting people with ambition. Her words had a dangerous edge to them, but Elliot found himself captivated, eager to impress. They clinked glasses, exchanged compliments, and, in hushed tones, shared secrets of their most ruthless business tactics. When he explained what he'd done to Fitcore, she laughed, a low, sultry sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "You really are relentless," she purred. "I admire that." Elliot felt a thrill of validation he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't know it yet, but Lila would soon offer him an opportunity he couldn't resist, and for the first time he'd find himself outmatched by someone even more ruthless than himself. Elliot strode through the bustling floors of Titan Fitness with a sense of satisfaction that bordered on euphoria. The facility was packed, every treadmill and weight bench occupied by eager members, many of whom he recognized from the small, independent gyms he'd methodically siphoned clients from. Titan Fitness gleamed with state-of-the-art machines, neon-lit workout studios, and polished granite counters at the juice bar, a stark contrast to the modest charm of the places he'd driven to the brink of collapse. As he walked past rows of dedicated gym-goers, exchanging nods with his trainers and basking in the energy of his empire, his eyes caught something, or rather, someone, that made him pause. Sitting gracefully on one of the machines was Lila, dressed in sleek workout attire that somehow looked both casual and luxurious. Lila commanded the entire room's attention. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and with each controlled movement, her lithe form seemed to exude a quiet, magnetic allure. Elliot noticed how people stopped mid-rep, eyes drawn to her, as though she were cast in an invisible net that pulled them in. Men and women alike couldn't resist stealing glances, their gazes lingering with an unspoken yearning. Even the music and clatter of weights seemed to fade in her presence. Elliot couldn't help but smile. Of course, she would be here. They'd crossed paths just last night, and though she'd left him with nothing more than a vague promise of future opportunities, he felt certain this was a sign. Gathering his confidence, he approached her, adjusting his tone to one of casual charm. "Lila," he said, offering a warm smile. "Didn't expect to see you here. Finding inspiration, are we?" She turned her head slowly, her piercing gaze meeting his. For a brief, tantalizing moment, a faint smile touched her lips, but she said nothing. It was as if she looked right through him, her eyes unfathomably deep, as though hiding secrets he couldn't begin to understand. Then, with the same silent grace, she rose from the machine, grabbed her water bottle, and walked past him, leaving behind only a faint scent of something intoxicatingly sweet, something that made Elliot's heart beat a little faster. For a moment, Elliot was frozen, taken aback by the unexpected dismissal. He was used to attention, especially in his own domain, yet here she was, as mysterious and aloof as ever, slipping away without a single word. Elliot's jaw tightened. This was his game, after all, and he was a master at it. He never let an opportunity slip, and Lila was an opportunity he intended to seize. If she thought she could leave him wanting, she was mistaken. He would play every card he had to win her favour. No one ignored Elliot Crane, least of all in his own facility. As she approached the exit, every eye in the gym turned, captivated. Some held their breath, as though hoping she'd glance back, that they might catch her attention for even a fleeting second. And then, just as she reached the doors, Lila paused. She turned, her gaze sweeping over the room with an ethereal quality that left everyone spellbound, like they were caught in a trance. For an instant, her eyes met Elliot's again. He felt a chill, a strange thrill he couldn't place, something far deeper than mere attraction. She turned away, her form slipping through the doors like a shadow, leaving the entire facility in a hushed reverence, as though they'd just witnessed something otherworldly. Elliot's heart raced. He didn't know what it was about Lila, but he knew one thing. He needed to make her his. The night settled over the city like a heavy cloak, dark and suffocating. Thick fog crept through the streets, winding around lampposts and spilling over the edges of sidewalks, giving everything a surreal, ghostly glow. In the distance, something stirred, a shape that wasn't bound by solid form, moving with a slow, deliberate grace through the dense mist. The shadows slithered along the walls of alleyways, crawling up buildings and drifting down darkened streets. It moved with an intent that was as cold and calculated as it was sinister, its shapeless form weaving through the fog like smoke. The creature approached the suburbs, where houses grew larger and gardens were neatly trimmed, each home seeming to boast its own silent pride. Finally, it came to rest outside an imposing residence, Elliot Crane's. Elliot slept soundly in his bed, a look of triumph still lingering on his face even in slumber, as if he dreamed of his recent conquests. The shadow hovered near the gate, casting an eerie, dark blot across the otherwise pristine lawn. Its form shifted, and the fog around it seemed to thicken, drawn to it like metal to a magnet. Slowly it moved forward, gliding across the lawn toward the grand house. Just as it reached the stone path, a voice echoed through the fog, firm, calm, and laced with a faint hint of amusement. "Stop!" The shadow froze, tendrils halting mid-air. A figure emerged from the darkness, poised and unyielding, her form illuminated by a sliver of moonlight breaking through the clouds. Lila. The shadow seemed to ripple with surprise, and then, with a fluid grace, it began to take shape. The darkness condensed, forming into the silhouette of a tall, gaunt figure. His face, once hidden, now emerged, a decaying visage with sunken eyes and skin that seemed stretched over ancient bones. Eldritch, the vampire, his form crackling with the energy of something ancient and terrible. "Oh." Eldritch's voice was smooth and dry, like the sound of crumbling parchment. "He's one of yours?" Lila smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Yes, Eldritch, he's mine." Eldritch inclined his head, the barest flicker of intrigue in his hollow gaze. "Fair game, my dear," he murmured, his voice dripping with an old-world charm. "I'll leave you to your project." He cast one last glance toward the house, his decaying features twisting into a sardonic grin, before he vanished back into the fog, leaving only a faint whisper of darkness trailing in his wake. Lila remained, her gaze fixed on Elliot's home, her expression unreadable. The fog curled around her, thickening as though in reverence. She stood under the pale, haunting glow of the moon, her beauty a striking contrast to the darkened night. And yet something was wrong, something in the way her shadow shifted against the ground. Beneath the soft moonlight, her shadow, seemed to move independently, shifting and distorting, revealing flashes of something far less human, far more monstrous. It stretched, writhing like a living thing. Jagged edges and elongated fingers splayed out as if reaching for prey. For an instant, sharp horns and a wicked tail flickered into view, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curling in a faint smile as she watched the house, her own shadow hinting at the truth of her nature, a being born of darkness, deception, and the thrill of the hunt. The moonlight faded as clouds swallowed it once more, casting her in complete shadow. She turned, her figure dissolving into the night, leaving Elliot's house untouched, for now. Lila Valen's office tower rose above the city like a dark monolith, an architectural marvel that commanded attention as much as she herself did. Hundreds of employees worked tirelessly on the floors beneath her, each one held in awe of their enigmatic leader. No one could fully describe what the company did, only that it involved property acquisitions, high-stakes investments, and a reputation for efficiency and dominance in the market. Lila operated with a precision that was almost supernatural, and while her staff respected her authority, they were also entranced by her charisma. Those who worked hard and upheld her standards flourished, rising quickly through the ranks and receiving handsome rewards. But those who tried to cut corners, cheat the system, or undermine her rules found themselves removed swiftly and ruthlessly, their careers dismantled with the same ease as one might sweep dust from a countertop. At her desk, Lila sat poised and regal, reviewing the latest reports on a new acquisition. Her secretary, an earnest young man who blushed whenever he entered her presence, knocked lightly at her door. "Miss Valen," he said, a mix of nerves and adoration in his tone. "Elliot Crane is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." A flicker of interest flashed in her eyes. "Show him in," she said smoothly, already anticipating the encounter. Elliot entered with an air of confidence, his gaze sweeping the luxurious office, as though evaluating his own competition. But Lila didn't look up immediately. She continued scanning her document, radiating indifference. After a pause, she finally spoke, her voice cold and direct. "I'm very busy, Mr. Crane. Unless your visit here can add money to my account, I believe you're wasting my time." Elliot faltered for a split second, unused to such a blunt reception. He cleared his throat, slipping on his most charming smile as he walked closer. "Lila, I just thought I'd pay you a visit. See if we could get to know each other a bit better." She glanced at him, her gaze cutting through his facade like a blade. "Get to know each other?" she repeated, her tone dripping with amusement. "Is that what this is? I have no interest in charming words, Mr. Crane. Words don't hold value here." Elliot stammered, struggling to keep his composure. He was a master at disarming people, bending them to his will, but Lila made him feel small, insignificant. Every attempt he made to impress her, to paint himself as her equal, only seemed to amuse her further. She watched him with an expression that bordered on disdain, like a queen entertaining a court jester. After a few more failed attempts to win her over, he finally left her office, feeling deflated. For the first time in years, Elliot Crane felt unsure of himself, his usual confidence replaced with a gnawing sense of inadequacy. That afternoon, determined to regain his confidence, he sought out a new venture, a struggling sports training centre, known for its traditional martial arts classes. It was an old building, and he could tell just from the faded signage and dated equipment that it was barely making ends meet. Perfect. He entered as a new member, his goal clear: infiltrate, gain the owner's trust, and start enticing members away to Titan fitness. It was a tried and true tactic, one he'd used many times before, but this time the owner, A grizzled man with a lifetime of martial arts training etched into his stance, wasn't interested. The man hardly looked at him, brushing off his attempts at conversation. He dismissed Elliot's praise with grunts and scowls, treating him like a nobody. Elliot seethed, but he kept his cool, forcing himself to smile through the rejection, vowing to find another way to bring the place down. As he left the centre, his mood darkened. He spotted a familiar figure entering through the front doors. Lila. She moved with a grace that drew every eye in the building, her expression sharp and intent. "Oh," she said with a faint smile, as if surprised. "If I'd known you were a martial artist, Elliot, I would have treated you differently." Elliot, desperate to impress, straightened his posture, trying to look more capable than he felt. "Well, I've dabbled in the arts for a long time," he said smoothly, hoping his bluff would go unnoticed. "Thought I'd give this place a look, but I'll admit, they're not very friendly." A smirk crossed Lila's face as she watched him. "Not friendly?" she repeated. "Interesting." She tilted her head, the flicker of a smile dancing on her lips. "This is my gym, Elliot. I own it." For a moment, Elliot felt the floor drop out from under him. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Lila simply gave him a polite nod, as though dismissing a trivial matter, and walked past him, leaving him standing there, stunned and, for the second time that day, feeling. Elliot stood in his office, eyes narrowed, waiting impatiently as the door creaked open. The man standing before him looked far from his usual confident self. He was a broken figure, his shoulders hunched and his gaze pleading. It was Jeff Adams, the owner of the small gym he'd been systematically dismantling over the past few months. "Please, Elliot," Jeff began, his voice strained. "We were supposed to be friends. I helped you when you first came to my gym. I thought you were here to help me, to help keep the place alive. This is everything to me. My father started this gym. It's all I have left of him." Elliot's eyes hardened. This was the part he hated. The begging, the desperation. It felt like weakness, and he had no time for it. "Jeff," he said coldly, crossing his arms, "that's business. I never promised you anything. You should have been more careful with your members. Offered them something they couldn't refuse. They came to me because you couldn't keep up." Jeff looked at him with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "I treated you like a friend, and all the while you were spreading rumours about me, convincing my members to leave. I never stood a chance." Elliot scoffed, giving him a dismissive look. "Life's hard, Jeff. Grow up. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. You're wasting my time." A silence hung in the air, thick and charged. Jeff's expression shifted, the sadness in his eyes darkening into something deeper, something ancient. He stood up straighter, his hands clenched into fists, and as he turned to leave, he muttered under his breath, words Elliot could barely make out. "May retribution find the hearts of the treacherous and make them suffer as I have suffered." The words hung in the air like a tangible presence, sending a shiver down Elliot's spine. He shook it off quickly, rolling his eyes. Old superstitions, he thought. Curses didn't bother him. He watched as Jeff walked out, shoulders slumped, leaving him alone in the silence of his office. Just as the door closed behind Jeff, it swung open again, almost immediately, and in walked Lila. She entered with a graceful confidence, her eyes bright with something that looked like mischief. "I just had a feeling we should get to know each other better, Elliot," she said, her tone dripping with charm. "You being a martial arts practitioner and all, I do love a fighter." Elliot's mood shifted instantly. It was as though the air had changed, filled with her intoxicating presence. She hadn't just brushed him off after all. He felt like he'd won her favour, finally earning her attention, her interest. This was validation, proof that he was back in control, the king of his world. "Well," he said, unable to keep the smug grin off his face, "I'm glad to hear it. There aren't many who can appreciate what it takes to do what we do, Lila." She watched him, an amused smile curling on her lips. "No, there aren't many. Only a few are willing to do what's necessary. To win." Her words held an edge, a darker meaning that Elliot didn't quite grasp. He leaned in, relishing the victory he felt surging through him. 2 wins in one day, he muttered to himself, feeling the high of success once more. Jeff was defeated, Lila was interested, and nothing could touch him. Lila's eyes lingered on him, almost too long, as if assessing him from the inside out. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she said, "Then I'll be watching closely, Elliot. Very closely." She turned, leaving the room with a grace that left him breathless. He watched her go, intoxicated by her presence, certain that he was on the verge of something monumental. But as the door clicked shut behind her, a faint chill crept over him, like the lingering shadow of something he couldn't quite see, something that left him wondering if he hadn't gained 2 wins, but rather stepped blindly into a game he didn't know the rules of. "Mr. Crane, you're not looking well," one of his staff commented hesitantly, catching him as he passed through the office. It had been weeks since Elliot had first started spending time with Lila, and though he brushed off any suggestion that he was struggling, his appearance told a different story. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his usually sharp features seemed somehow dulled, as though something was slowly draining the life out of him. "Nonsense," Elliot replied, forcing a confident smile. "I am living my best life. I've been busy, sure, meeting with Lila and working on new projects, but I've never felt more alive." His voice held a forced enthusiasm, and though he managed to laugh, there was an emptiness in it. He hurried off, brushing away any lingering concern with an air of indifference. That evening, he was seated across from Lila in an upscale restaurant, the kind of place where velvet drapes lined the walls and chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over everything. He couldn't take his eyes off her. She seemed even more radiant, her dark eyes glinting in the low light. "You're captivating, Lila," he said, reaching for her hand. "Your beauty, your power, everything about you is remarkable." She tilted her head, a faint smirk playing on her lips. "I've heard all this before, Elliot," she replied, her tone laced with boredom. Elliot felt a pang of frustration, but he masked it quickly, redoubling his charm. He was used to winning people over, to hearing admiration and respect in their voices, yet Lila remained an enigma, as cool and elusive as ever. After dinner, they stepped outside, and a sleek black car waited at the curb to take Lila home. Elliot slid in beside her, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye, hoping to catch some sign of approval. As they pulled up to her grand estate, its shadowed walls looming under the night sky, Elliot leaned in. "I'd love to come in for a nightcap," he said, his voice smooth, eager. Lila turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready, Elliot?" she asked, her eyes glinting with something darker than mere invitation. "Oh, yes," he replied, a thrill rushing through him. She smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "Then by all means enter, by your own free will." He stepped out of the car, feeling an odd chill at her words but brushing it off, thinking only of the prize waiting inside. Inside her lavish home, he couldn't help but admire the elegance surrounding him. Dark, antique furniture filled the rooms, and tall windows let in slivers of moonlight, casting intricate shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was thick with mystery, and he felt the thrill of finally being in her private world. "Lila, I've never met anyone like you, he said, his voice filled with admiration. You're incredible. I don't think I've ever felt this way before. Lila merely watched him, an unreadable look on her face. I've heard it all before, Elliot, she said again, her tone as indifferent as ever. Desperate to make an impression, he continued, No, truly, I mean it. I think I might even love you. A glint of something sharp flashed in her eyes, and she leaned in, close enough that he could feel the coldness radiating from her. I know you do, Elliot, she murmured. Her gaze held his, and for a moment he felt a strange, creeping unease, an inkling that perhaps he'd underestimated her, that he'd let himself fall into something far beyond his control. But her eyes held him, and he was too enchanted to care. For tonight he was hers, even if the cost was something he couldn't yet fathom. Elliot's world had narrowed to a single obsession, Lila. He could hardly think straight anymore, consumed by thoughts of her every minute, craving her approval like a starving man craves food. He found himself waiting on her every word, desperate to prove himself worthy. That evening, he found himself standing before her, his voice trembling with need. Lila, I want you to marry me, he blurted out, his heart pounding. I want to be with you always. I'll do anything. Lila's response was a laugh, low and dark. Her eyes danced with amusement, and she regarded him with a look that was almost pitying. Oh, Elliot, she purred, I know men like you all too well. You think that once we're married, you'll take everything from me, slowly leeching away my wealth and power. No, no, he insisted, shaking his head with a fervour that bordered on desperation. I would never do that, Lila. I'll do anything to prove my love. Anything. Anything? She asked, her voice silky smooth, a hint of darkness woven into it. He nodded, his gaze locked onto her, unwavering. In that moment, he would have moved heaven and earth to win her favour. Lila's lips curled into a cunning smile, and she reached into a drawer, producing a thick stack of papers. Then let's make it official, she said, placing the contract on the table. This document will transfer all of your businesses to me. I need to know, Elliot, that you're not just trying to take from me. I need you to give, to show me your devotion. Elliot barely registered the words. His mind was hazy, clouded by his overpowering need for her. His hands shook as he took the pen, his every thought centered on the promise that she'd finally be his. Sign this, Elliot, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down his spine. And I'll be yours for this night. But I must warn you, I am not like other women. I've been known to be quite dominating. The promise in her words stoked a fire within him, and without a second thought, he scrawled his signature across the contract. She lifted her phone and took pictures as he signed, even recording a video as he recited, I am signing this contract willingly, transferring all my businesses to Lila Valen of my own free will. He glanced up as he finished, noticing for the first time 2 figures standing in the shadows, silent witnesses, her lawyers. They slipped out of the room as silently as they had appeared, and he didn't give them a second thought. His entire world had narrowed down to this moment, to her. With a final flourish of his signature, he looked up at her, triumphant. I am yours for this night, Lila, by my own free will, he said, his voice full of longing. You have asked for me, and I accept. Her smile grew, slow and wicked. Yes, I have, and now you are mine. Before his eyes, her form began to shift, her features elongating, twisting into something dark and horrifyingly beautiful. Her eyes burned with a crimson fire, her skin taking on a darker hue as though shadows themselves clung to her. Horns sprouted from her head, curling gracefully like a crown of thorns, and her mouth twisted into a smile that revealed sharp, gleaming fangs. Her entire form radiated an aura of ancient power, dripping with both evil and allure. Elliot's breath hitched as he watched, a horrified fascination locking him in place. Her laughter echoed through the room, rich and resonant, filled with a dark, malicious pleasure that sent shivers down his spine. "Didn't I tell you, Elliot?" she whispered, her voice now deeper, more resonant, echoing through his mind. "I am not like other women. I warned you I could be dominating, didn't I?" The room around him began to darken, shadows creeping in from every corner, swallowing the light. He tried to move, to flee, but his legs felt like lead, his body frozen in place as her laughter filled his ears, drowning out everything else. And as the night closed in around him, Elliot realized, far too late, that he had given himself willingly, utterly, irreversibly, to something far beyond his understanding, something that had waited centuries to claim a fool like him. The darkness swallowed him whole, and her laughter was the last sound he would ever hear. Jeff Adams swept the floor of his small, empty gym for what he believed would be the last time. The room was silent, the echoes of former members now a distant memory. His heart felt heavy as he prepared to lock the doors for good. His family's legacy lost to the machinations of a man he had once foolishly called a friend. As he straightened up, ready to leave, the faint sound of footsteps caught his attention. He looked up to see a figure approaching, a woman with a scarf wrapped around her head, obscuring her face. She moved quickly, slipping an envelope into his hand without a word. Before he could thank or question her, she had turned and disappeared into the shadows. Assuming it was another bill, another reminder of his failure, he sighed and tore it open, bracing himself for more bad news. But as he read, his eyes widened in disbelief. Titan Fitness, the very empire Elliot had built by destroying others, was now in his name. The letter, stamped and signed, declared him the sole owner of the entire chain, every location, every asset. His hand shook as he reread the words, certain he was imagining them. How could this be? "Impossible," he whispered, looking up, searching the street for the mysterious woman who had handed him this gift. But she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of her presence and the impossible fortune she had delivered. Over the next few days, word spread among other gym owners whom Elliot had scammed, each finding checks slipped under their doors, enough to keep their businesses running, and then some. The gym community buzzed with rumours and questions. It seemed Elliot had, without warning, sold everything to Lila Varlan and vanished, leaving behind no trace or farewell. His empire, built on deceit, had been stripped from him overnight, passed into the hands of those he had wronged. Months passed, and Jeff, now the unexpected owner of a thriving business chain, walked home after another busy day, still unable to fully comprehend the reversal of his fortune. He felt gratitude, of course, but also an odd sense of wonderment, as though something cosmic and unseen had turned in his favour. As he passed a dimly lit alley, a voice rasped out of the shadows, brittle and broken. "Help a poor man. In need." Jeff paused, peering into the darkness. A figure huddled against the wall, a man whose skin clung to his face like it had been stretched too tightly, his cheeks sunken and his eyes empty, haunted. But the face, even in its withered state, was one Jeff would never forget. "Elliot," he breathed, horror lacing his voice. The man's lips curled in a feeble, almost desperate attempt at a smile, his gaze hollow. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible, as if every word cost him the last remnants of his strength. Jeff took a step back, unable to reconcile the sight before him. The powerful, arrogant Elliot Crane reduced to this shrunken, withered shell. He felt a chill run through him, remembering the curse he had muttered in a moment of despair. Retribution had come for Elliot, but not by Jeff's hand. No, this was something far darker, something he dared not question. He looked away, unable to bear the sight any longer, and walked on, leaving the figure to sink further into the shadows. As he did, a shiver of understanding passed through him, a sense that whatever had brought Elliot to this fate was not yet satisfied, that some forces are best left unchallenged, especially when that they demand retribution. Behind him, the alley fell silent, save for the faint whisper of a name. Lila, echoing like a ghost, lost in the wind. Final chapter. A new conquest. Lila sat in the dimly lit drawing room of her grand estate, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across her face, a faint, satisfied smile lingering on her lips. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting as she savoured the victory over her latest conquest, Elliot Crane. Every last thread of his ambition had been unravelled, leaving him a hollow shell. This was her art, her skill, honed over centuries. Across from her, Eldritch lounged in an ancient, high-backed chair, watching her with eyes that glinted like embers. His decayed features were draped in shadow, but his expression held a faint note of admiration. The vampire leaned forward, his voice a crackle in whisper. "Well played, my dear," he said. "Though, if it were my game, I'd have drained him much quicker. Mortals are so delicate after all." Lila let out a soft, dark laugh. "That's where you and I differ, Eldritch. Why rush? Humans like Elliot, they ruin themselves quite nicely when given the chance. I merely let him cling to his ambitions until he was nothing more than a desperate fool, ready to sign everything away. I find satisfaction in letting them watch their worlds collapse." Eldritch raised a brow, his gaze sharpening. "Ah, yes, the succubus's touch. There's always a certain elegance to your methods." "Legends speak of my kind," Lila murmured, her voice laced with a sinister charm. "The greedy, the selfish, the powerful. They all think themselves untouchable, above consequences. They think they're controlling the game, and they never see it coming until it's too late." She tilted her head, watching the flickering candlelight. "In the end, they give me everything. Willingly." "Efficient, precise." Eldritch agreed, his voice like dry paper. "Our methods may differ, but we share a common taste for justice. One that's far beyond what mortals deserve. A pity they never understand the beauty of it all." For a moment, silence fell between them, thick with the shared understanding of the creatures older than time. Finally, Eldritch rose from his seat, his movements slow, measured, as though savouring each step. "It's been a pleasure, Lila," he said, inclining his head. "While we may walk different paths, our desires often cross. I hope our work brings us together again." He paused at the door, reaching into his cloak, his lips twisted into a sly smile as he produced a small, folded newspaper clipping, handing it to her with a hint of amusement. "A gift, my dear," he said, a glint of dark mischief in his eyes. "I was going to pursue this one myself, but I thought you'd enjoy it far more." With a final nod, he slipped into the shadows, his form dissolving into tendrils of darkness, vanishing into the night. Lila unfolded the clipping, her eyes narrowing as she took in the headline. It was an article, brief but telling, about a powerful financier in the city, a man known for his callous disregard for those he destroyed in his relentless pursuit of wealth and influence. His name was unfamiliar, but the face, the description, the details, all too familiar. Her smile grew as she read, her mind already weaving a plan, already savouring the next game to be played. The newspaper clipping felt warm between her fingers, as though it held the promise of something deliciously inevitable. In the dim light, her laughter filled the empty room, soft and haunting, as she gazed at the photo of her next conquest. Thank you for watching. Remember, all the stories you hear on this channel are completely original. Your support, from likes, comments and super thanks to becoming a full member, is what keeps this channel alive and thriving. I couldn't do it without you, and I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you. Stay tuned for more chilling tales, and as always, thank you for being part of the Professor Shadow family.